Hi guys, just a few years ago, the 24-70 2.8 Sigma Art lens was probably the best 24-70 lens that you could buy, certainly for the Sony E-mount system. It was better in most ways than the Sony G Master 24-70. But then Sony released the 24-70 G Master version 2, and that trumped the Sigma in almost every single way. Well, now Sigma has shot back, and they have a new 24-70 f2.8 Sigma Art lens, and this thing is so bananas good. It makes me wonder if Sony should keep their prices the way they are for their 24-70 G Master, because there are not many reasons to get that over this lens, as you will see in this video. However, at the end of the video, I will show that the 24-70 G Master version 2 might be better for certain people, even though it has a much higher price tag. Let's find out if you're one of those types of people. You see me? I'm outside interacting with the real world. Well, I'm talking to a camera in front of the real world. It counts, right? So as I walk Midtown Toronto, I just want to say thanks to Sigma Canada for sending this guy over pre-release so that I can put it through its paces and I can show you guys what it can do. And it can do a whole lot. So let's take a look at the build quality of this beautiful lens. It comes in 10% lighter than the previous Sigma Art 24-70. It is also a little bit shorter and a little bit thinner in the barrel, so definitely better for travel. Nice compact lens. It is still not quite as light as the Sony 24-70 G Master version 2. That one comes in at 695 grams, but this is not a far cry at 735. You have a wonderful aperture ring that can be clicked or declicked, very satisfying clicks, an autofocus to manual focus switch, 2 focus hold buttons. There is also a locking switch to prevent lens creep when you are trying to store it. But then if you twist the lens with any bit of force at all, the lock will disengage, so you can do some quick photos and some quick videos. You can also lock the aperture ring into auto or manual mode. Premium materials here from the Sigma Art lens with the metal, the plastic, and the rubber. A very nice smooth turning focus ring at the top here, and also the zoom ring turns nice and smoothly with just enough force. Unlike the G Master, it doesn't have the ability to make the ring looser or tighter with a switch, but that is not something you see much on any lens. Has a standard petal lens hood with a push button to get on and off. It does not have that little window that you see on the Sony G Master 2 that can help you turn something like a polarizer or an ND filter. When we look at sharpness for this lens, we see excellent sharpness. That is one of the things that is difficult to get in a zoom lens, is sharpness, especially down at f2.8. But happy to report, of course, a Sigma Art lens going to be exceptionally sharp for a zoom lens, very sharp in the center. It falls off a little bit towards the corners when you are down at f2.8. As you stop it down, it does get sharper across the frame. So around f8, I find, is the sweet spot if you're trying to take landscapes or architecture photography, where the entire frame, corner to corner, is sharp, but still no complaints about the corner softness, even down at f2.8. When it comes to the bokeh on this lens, it does not disappoint. Even though it is a zoom lens, it still has excellent out of focus backgrounds, just nice fall off from things that are in focus to things that are out of focus, just creamy, smooth back there, nothing distracting. You got some vagrants in your shot, don't worry about it. You can blur those guys out at f2.8. Just really nice to see on a lens, but of course it's a Sigma Art lens. Now when it comes to the bokeh balls, and I know you people are picky about your bokeh balls out there, I'm gonna say bokeh before balls every single time because I'm out in public and I wanna look like an upstanding citizen, but I was really surprised, even for a Sigma Art lens, at how great they were. Just very circular, there was no haloing, no onion ringing, nice and clean, just, and as you stop it down, they stay around. It doesn't get all jaggy edged as you go down in stops. It is just fantastic. It was some of the best bokeh balls that I have ever seen on a lens, certainly for a zoom lens. Good job, Sigma. So in terms of the flare and ghosting and coma levels, they're fantastic on this lens. The coatings are wonderful, as good as it gets for a zoom lens. Sigma really played it up in their literature, and the results do pan out. Fantastic at controlling flare and ghosting, and the coma levels are wonderful as well. Now when it comes to chromatic aberration and longitudinal chromatic aberration, I did expect to find some trouble because there are no 24-70 f2.8 lenses that do not struggle with these two elements, and this lens is no different. It is a pretty good performer. It is on par probably with the Sony G Master version 2. But when you're pixel peeping in difficult environments, you will see both some chromatic aberration and some longitudinal chromatic aberration. It just appears that it is almost impossible to make a 24-70 f2.8 lens of this high quality without sacrificing a little bit of the performance in those two areas. I did find at the wide end it was better at controlling the chromatic aberration and the longitudinal chromatic aberration than at the 70mm focal length. So a good performer in those regards, not a great performer, but once again, it was expected. Now, somewhere the Sony lens has the Sigma beat is when it comes to linear focus. The Sony G Master version 2 is linear in its manual focus, whereas the E-mount version of this lens is not. If you do have an L-mount camera, then you can switch the lens and make it linear. However, on the E-mount camera, you are out of luck. When it comes to sun stars, you're not usually expecting fantastic sun stars out of a 24-70 lens, but the sun stars do look quite nice when you stop the lens all the way down to f16 or f22. The autofocus on this lens is of course spectacular. Sigma is using their wonderful HLA autofocus system, and that is certainly, in my opinion, on par with Sony's latest and greatest autofocus. It is so snappy, reliable, instant, dead silent. Whether you're tracking AFC, AFS, it doesn't matter. It is just a perfect autofocus system. But of course, if you're using a Sony camera, remember that you will be capped at 15 frames per second, so you won't get that ultimate burst rate if you're using one of those high shooting cameras like the A9 series or the Sony A1. When it comes to focus breathing, I'm happy to report this lens is also excellent at controlling focus breathing, which is great news because if you are using a Sony camera, you can't use that focus breathing compensation because it's a third-party lens, but you really won't need it with this lens. At 16mm or 70mm or in between, it doesn't matter. The lens barely breathes at all. It does a much better job than the Sony G Master in that regard, but once again, the Sony G Master in Sony cameras can use that focus breathing compensation. But that's great news for Panasonic, for L-mount owners, for Sony owners as well, that the focus breathing is so minimal on this lens. Another wonderful element of this lens is the minimum focus distance. The minimum focus distance is actually 17 centimeters when you are at the 24mm focal length, and that means you have to take off the lens hood to get the minimum focus distance because the lens hood will be touching the subject and things will still be in focus. That certainly beats the Sony at the wide end in terms of minimum focus distance. The Sony is 21 centimeters, this one's 17. Now at the long end, where you can't get as close to your subject, the Sony's actually a little bit better at 30 centimeters versus this one at 34 centimeters, but that's zoomed out to 70. If you want to get really close to the subject for stuff close to macro photography, you'll want to use the wide end on this guy. Now when it comes to the price, this is coming in at $11.99 USD. When you compare that to the $2,300 that you would have to pay for the Sony G Master version 2, and this lens is as good or better in almost every single category, is going to make a lot of people want to choose this lens over that Sony. But at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that some people will still want to pick up that Sony lens versus this Sigma lens, and who might those people be? Well, they'll be people who appreciate that little bit of a lighter carry. At 695 grams, it is a noticeable difference. It is a bit smaller and lighter of a lens. It's also going to work better with stabilization. If you are hand holding, especially in video, the Sony first-party lenses, the Sony lenses with the Sony bodies are going to be more stable than the third-party lenses with the Sony bodies. You of course also have that cap of 15 frames per second on this lens. So if you have something like an A1 or an A9, then you're probably going to want to pick up that Sony G Master lens if you like that really fast burst shooting. The Sony version is linear. This one is not when you're using it on an E-mount body, and Sony does have that focus breathing compensation. So if you want absolutely zero focus breathing, then the Sony lens with the Sony body will do you better. So big thanks to Sigma Canada for sending this thing out pre-release for review so I could show it to you guys, and thanks for making a great alternative to the much more expensive but also excellent Sony GM version 2 24-70. Let me know down below if this is a lens you would pick up over the Sony, and if not, let me know your reasons. We'll have a nice little discussion about it. Thanks for watching this. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.
Mr. Beast!
He thinks I'm Mr. Beast.
No,
I am.